I would just like to take a couple of minutes to thank Harvard University, particularly the Center for International Development, to become our co-host, as well as Harvard Lakshmi Mittal South Asia Institute to become the co-sponsor for this event. I would like to thank the other organizers from the government of Bangladesh, as well as the business leaders and the sponsors for this event. I would also like to thank the scholars in Boston, including our chairman, Mr. Iqbal Kadir. And I thank you all again, like to make it to the event. We apologize to start the event a little bit late because of some technical glitch, as well as some transportation issues. So without much delay, I would like to introduce our chairman, Mr. Iqbal Kadir, who recently joined at Harvard Belfer Center as a senior research fellow. And I would also like to mention at this point that the theme of the conference, the name Bangladesh Rising, it was proposed by Mr. Iqbal Kadir, and that made really good interest among the participants. So please welcome Mr. Iqbal Kadir.
Honorable Advisor to the Prime Minister, Principal Secretary, and many other distinguished guests here. It's a pleasure to be here at this beautiful room, although it's a little small for our crowd here, but there is no conspiracy to make it represent Bangladesh, where there are too many people in one small space. But it is actually a good quality room, so hopefully you will enjoy the day. I just wanted to make one small point, other than welcoming everyone, that 25 years ago, I started an endeavor to have telecommunication all over Bangladesh. I was in Wall Street at the time, and I started going to the telephone companies to convince them to come to Bangladesh and create a company. And one of them turned me down, saying, we don't want to go to Bangladesh, we're not Red Cross. But what happened after 7, 8 years of work from that 1993 is that we now have a company in Bangladesh that's not only helping the country with communications facilities all over the country, the company is worth $6 billion. So I want to show you this gap of perception that Bangladesh is a destiny for charitable enterprises, but the actual reality of commercial success. And that difference, that gap, I think is still quite pronounced in people's minds outside the United States, outside Bangladesh. And that this conference is partly to correct that. It's not anything against non-profit organizations. I mean, Harvard University itself is a non-profit organization. It's just that the country cannot make progress without commercial success. We want to emphasize that. And that's why, along with everyone else, including the government officials who are promoting and supporting that progress, there are lots of private sector players in this room. Because at the end of the day, we can make progress through commercial success, through profits. Profits and progress have the same Latin root, actually. Okay. Because if you are trying to make profits, you will be drive towards greater productivity, more efficiency, and that's what's the underlying ingredient for progress. And of course, it also encourages other entrepreneurs to come in and create new things. And in fact, it helps the entrepreneurs in Bangladesh to get a better bargaining power against foreign investors who could come in. And again, I will not make a long speech. I am done. And there will be a lot of interesting speakers. And I just wanted to show you a video that recently produced by the World Bank on Bangladesh, a third party. It's not created by me or any particular individual. So it'll give you a good introduction of where Bangladesh stands today. Thank you. No sound?
The economy was shattered. 45 years later, the country has been transformed into a model of human and economic. Its success is rooted in a resilient population, strong partnerships between the government, NGOs, and the private sector, homegrown development solutions, and sound macroeconomic policies. It holds lessons for other emerging economies. Low-cost solutions to major public health threats and a vaccination program for all children have delivered dramatically improved health outcomes. Female health workers employed by the government have taken family planning solutions door to door, leading to rapidly reduced fertility. There has been significant progress in education. Today, nearly all children are enrolled in primary education, thanks to a massive increase in schools and cash stipends for poor families. Girls especially have benefited. Female primary and secondary school enrollment rates are now among the highest in South Asia. Beyond the expansion of girls' education, women's participation in the labor force has helped reduce poverty. NGOs have played a vital role in mobilizing microcredit and creating self-employment opportunities for women. Bangladesh's garment industry is the largest employer of women outside of agriculture, creating millions of jobs in the growing economy. Other Bangladeshis have found work abroad. In the past 15 years, remittances from migrant labor have become a major source of foreign exchange earnings. Growth has also been driven by infrastructure improvements, rural electrification, and a vast network of roads connecting farmers with urban markets. Farmers have been quick to embrace modern technology, ushering in a green revolution, including the use of high-yield seeds. Supported by government policies, farmers have helped Bangladesh become self-sufficient in rice production. As impressive as these achievements are, they continue to be threatened by natural disasters and climate change. But since the devastating cyclone of 1970, hundreds of shelters have been built in coastal areas. The government has developed a community-based early warning system and provides a host of safety nets targeted to the poor. Bangladesh is now among a small group of countries that have combined rapid growth with reduced inequality. Over the past decade, Bangladesh's economy has grown an average 6.2% each year, well above global rates. In the last 30 years, the number of Bangladeshis living in extreme poverty has fallen by nearly half. In 2014, Bangladesh crossed the threshold to become a low middle-income country. By ensuring macroeconomic stability, improving infrastructure, and creating more and better jobs, Bangladesh hopes to reach middle-income status by its 50th birthday.
Let me now introduce our Master of Ceremony, Nicholas Sullivan, who went to Harvard and Fletcher School, and he has visited Bangladesh several times and has written a book on involving Bangladesh and telecommunications in general. And so I just wanted to introduce Nicholas Sullivan. And you can read his not really specified in the book, but he will take over. Nicholas is one of his, he has many roles here. One important job is that he must be tough on time limits. Okay.
Okay, we're starting out behind.
No, I know.
Well, we'll catch up.
You must not at least get worse.
Okay, good. Thank you, Iqbal. It's a great honor to be here. As Iqbal said, I've been to Bangladesh a couple of times. I love the country, I love its people, and I think from what I've been hearing is that it's a very different country than it was when I was last there in 2006, given the intense growth over the last decade as it moves from a kind of least developed country to a rising tiger. And just a couple of points to kind of punctuate the data in the video. Last year, I believe, per capita GDP in Bangladesh surpassed that of Pakistan for the first time. Its growth rate has been exceeding that of Pakistan. This year, the World Economic Forum says that it might eclipse the Indian growth rate. And as Iqbal told me the other day, the GDP of Bangladesh now at 300 billion is what China was in 2004, 2005. So if you think that's, China in its like third decade of reform had reached that level. So that's a pretty impressive metric. And compared to India and Pakistan, Bangladesh has a lower population growth and a longer life expectancy. It's got one of the highest levels of digital transactions in South Asia and one of the lowest number of dormant bank accounts. So clearly money is moving and moving electronically, which is really impressive. And along with increasing exports and increasing remittances, there's a buildup of foreign reserve currency, which certainly was a big issue, as I remember when I was last there. So as Bangladesh is about to graduate from least developed country status in 2024, it should open up more opportunities for investment and improve credit ratings. It will make it more difficult to accept aid, but that is, I think, a good thing in keeping with its movement from a aid-dependent to a trade-dependent country. So a couple of comments about, before I introduce our keynote. I'll be introducing the moderators for each panel and the keynote speakers, and then just making linkages between the two panels. The morning sessions roughly focus on the economy, the macroeconomics, the foreign direct investment and economic zones, and the afternoon sessions are more focused on infrastructure with power, ICT, and human capital with women in business. So there's a kind of clean break between the two. We will try to keep on time or catch up if we can. So our keynote this morning, who is on introducing the macroeconomic panel, is Frank Nefke, who's the research director at the Center for International Development at Harvard. His research focuses on economic growth and how economic actors can diversify economies. And he's going to apply this research to the facts on the ground in Bangladesh today. Before he was at the Center for International Development, Frank taught at the Erasmus School of Economics in Rotterdam and previously studied at Utrecht University and the University of Amsterdam. So please welcome Frank Nefke.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here in front of this distinguished audience and at this conference, which touches on many issues that are core to economic growth. So there are issues that will be discussed on FDI, on economic zones, inclusion, and diaspora engagement. And I hope to put this a little bit into a context of a theory of economic growth that was developed at the Center for International Development's Growth Lab. Center for International Development is run by Harvard professor Ricardo Hausman, and I'm in charge of the research at the Growth Lab within that. So let me see, do I have a clicker to move? Well, actually, do you have a... That will be an issue. Okay. could you? So the first graph, it basically shows the growth experience of Bangladesh, which, as you all know, was rather slow for quite a while, but then has been picking up pace very fast. And as was already shown, Bangladesh is fast picking up with Pakistan, India. But the question is whether, thank you. The question is whether this is the question is whether there is a more ambitious target to be set here. So if you, maybe not directly comparing to Thailand, but if you compare to Vietnam and China, they started at sort of the same GDP per capita, but have grown tremendously and consistently for quite a while. So how should we think about economic growth? Well, how countries grow is actually a very odd question. This is a famous paper by Hall and Jones in 1998 that asks the question, why do some countries produce so much more output per worker than others? So they compare in their introduction the US to Niger, which if you look at nowadays numbers, it's orders of magnitudes higher GDP per capita in the US than in Niger. In 1988, the difference was about a factor 35, which Hall and Jones attributed for a factor 1.5 to the fact that the US just has more capital per worker, a factor 3 to the fact that the US labor force is more educated. And then there's a factor 7.7, almost 8, that is unexplained. So in economics, we call that technology. So what that basically is saying is that there's some kind of magic in the world that allows you to produce, and the US just has a more powerful kind of magic than Niger. That's of course not very satisfactory as an answer to why are some countries so much more productive than others. So at the Center for International Development, we started looking at a related but slightly different question. We asked, so what does the US make? And this is the export basket of the US. And this is the export basket of Niger. As you can see, the US has a much higher value of export per worker. But it also produces many different things. Whereas in Niger, what is being produced is basically uranium ore. So instead of looking at this question, why do some countries produce so much more output per worker than others? We started looking at a related question, and namely, why do some countries produce many more products than others? So if you think of how you actually produce stuff in the economy, standard economic models typically say you combine some capital with some labor, you add technology, maybe in a Cobb-Douglas function, and then you produce some homogeneous output, usually measured in dollars. But how would you actually make a car? Well, first of all, you need a blueprint of a car. You need to know how to make a car. Second, you will need dedicated machinery to produce cars. You need people who actually know how to use this machinery. You will need infrastructure to get the cars to the customers and the raw materials to your factories. You may actually need the help of some technology institutes. This is the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, which specializes on automotive technology. And you might need dedicated institutions. So this is an article that ran a couple of years ago in The Atlantic that asked, if we all start driving around in autonomous vehicles and we get into an accident, who will be liable? And as long as we haven't answered that question, it's very hard for that industry to take off. So to make a car, you actually need many different things. So instead of thinking of production as being a combination, as combining a homogeneous mass of capital with a homogeneous mass of labor, we actually started thinking of it as combining all kinds of different types of capital with all kinds of different types of skilled workers. And that actually suggested a metaphor. In a sense, this is not that different from how the game of Scrabble works. So to make a specific product, you need a specific combination of capabilities. Just as if you want to play Scrabble, you will need a specific set of letters to produce a specific word. So what is the consequence of that? So if you think of a Scrabble theory of economic development, if you have one letter, you can actually write only one word. So if you have 3 letters, you can write 4 words. If you have 4 letters, you can write already 9 words and longer words. So the metaphor here is, if you have very few capabilities, you cannot produce many different products. And the products that you can make are not that complex. So if you were in a situation where you actually have, sorry about that, if you have 10 letters, you can write many, many different words and also quite long words. So if you put this into a mathematical model, you can actually look at what the relation is between the share of capabilities that exist in the world that you as a country own and the share of products that exist in the world that you actually can produce. So here on the horizontal axis, you can think of that as the share of the alphabet that a country has. And on the vertical axis, it's sort of like the share of the dictionary that you know how to write with those letters. And you see different lines. These different lines correspond to different worlds. The ones that go up linearly, those are very simple worlds. So those are worlds in which the words are very short. So products require maybe one capability, and then for one extra capability, you get one extra product. Whereas if you move to the right in this picture, you get more and more curved worlds. So that is when the world becomes very complex. So imagine that to produce any product in the world, you need 10 different capabilities. Then at that point, with 5 capabilities, you cannot produce anything. With 6 capabilities, you cannot produce anything. 7, 8, 9, still no production. Only when you have 10 capabilities, you might be able to produce one product, if you're lucky. Now compare that to a country that actually has 15 capabilities. If you add an extra capability to those 15, you can combine that with all of the other capabilities you had to produce new products. So this means that in the world that we're living in, that is highly complex, there is a trap. If you have few capabilities, it's very hard to produce output, and you have no incentives to acquire new capabilities because they wouldn't allow you to move into more complex products. Whereas if you have many capabilities, you can produce many things, and you have all of the incentives to keep investing in new capabilities. So in this framework, there are actually 2 ways in which you can grow. The first option is that you grow by leveraging the letters you have. And the easiest way to explain that is with this little puzzle. So which animal wouldn't fit in this picture? It's actually a very hard question if you don't have a theory, but I just gave you a theory. So obviously, it is very easy to turn a bear into a zebra. You just add a Z, but a bear can never become a lion. So this is the principle that we try to leverage in how countries actually diversify. What we know is not, unfortunately, which products require the same capabilities. So what we do know is which countries make the same products, so we can connect countries to the products they make. But what we want to have is actually a network that connects products if they require similar capabilities. And the idea of how to measure that is that we say, well, 2 products require similar capabilities if they're very often produced by the same countries. So what we did is we looked at the trade data, and we looked at the combination of products that were being co-produced in the same countries. And when they were often co-produced, we connected them, assuming that they require the same capabilities. And if you do that, you get a network that looks like this, where each product is a node. So each of these dots is a product. And the colors are broad product classes. For instance, green is garments, dark blue is machinery, light blue is electronics, purple is chemicals. And then diversification actually happens on top of this space, because it turns out that it's much easier for a country to move to products that are close to the products that they are already making in this space. So let's look at Bangladesh. So Bangladesh started with a bunch of products in the periphery of this product space, which are, the periphery is mostly agriculture and extractive goods. And then we move forward through time. And what you see is that in 1980, something starts happening. You see all of a sudden there are green dots in the garments cluster popping up. And once there are some green dots, it actually very fast fills up. So Bangladesh very fast filled up the entire garments cluster, and that is basically what it has been doing ever since. And nowadays it's one of, as is well known, it's one of the most important garment exporters in the world. Okay. So Bangladesh went from a country that predominantly produced jute to a country that predominantly produced garments, with a tremendous growth in those exports. Okay, let's look at how another country has done it, Thailand. So Thailand also started in the periphery with mostly agricultural goods, and also went into garments a little bit earlier, but then stuff happened later on in the in the 90s. You see now that the blue electronics cluster is being developed. And over time, Thailand actually even manages to start producing in the center of this product space the most complex products in machinery and chemicals. That's a bit of clicking. So Thailand went from mostly agriculture to a very diversified economy, and it has been growing in many different products. So the diversification in Bangladesh looks a little bit like this. This is the market share of Bangladesh in world exports in 5 different goods: garments, electronics, machinery, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals. This is Taiwan, which also starts with garments, but that maxes out, but then other products come on. This is Korea, which also starts in garments and very quickly develops other products. Thailand does the same. China does the same and now is also over the peak of its garment production. And Vietnam actually started later, but managed to move in electronics and nowadays also machinery and chemicals. So this related diversification is the first option to grow. The second option is that you actually acquire new letters, that you acquire new capabilities. And that is actually very hard, but apparently Bangladesh did it once in its history. So how did Bangladesh start exporting garments? And this is a famous case study by the World Bank that has been redone by Klepper and Mostafa and came out in Management Science this year, about the company Dash. Because as you saw, Bangladesh started really exporting garments in 1980. And this is basically the time that Bangladesh sent 126 workers for a 6-month intensive training to Korea, to Daewoo, which was then the main garments producer in the world. And from that, the people who learned how to set up garment production lines, they went to work for other companies. And in less than a decade, there were 664 different garment manufacturers. Many of them actually either were set up by workers that were originally sent to Korea, or they hired these workers to train new setup workers. So this is actually not a unique thing to happen. If you look at, for instance, IT in Bangalore, India is very well known for its software and IT industry. If you look at Bangalore, the patents that came out of Bangalore, until 1989, there were very few patents. There were actually no patents at all in the USPTO system in computer software and hardware. Then in 1989, there is a patent filed by HP with local inventors in Bangalore. And after that, there is a range of companies that enters Bangalore and starts patenting. And this is the beginning of the boom of IT in Bangalore. If you look more carefully at what actually happened, there's also a lot of involvement of diaspora between Silicon Valley and India. So what happened was that it wasn't just that India had very well-trained software engineers. They actually got help from people in other places to get the industry kickstarted, just like Dash did in the 1980s for garments. Another way to actually attract know-how, so to attract these new letters, these new capabilities, is migration. And if you look at some of the most successful places in Asia, like Singapore and Hong Kong, in Singapore the foreign-born population is 46%, in Hong Kong it's 40%. And finally, if you look at Vietnam, Vietnam has had a very strong influx of FDI. And this FDI is not just money, it's actually also know-how that helped them diversify into new products. This time not Daewoo, but Samsung. So I want to leave you with this as a statement that we can discuss further on. Economic growth actually can happen through two main channels. You can leverage the capabilities you have and you diversify into products that are related to what you're good at. But that will only bring you just so far. At some point, you will need to acquire new capabilities. And in most places in the world that became successful cases of fast development, they didn't develop these capabilities themselves. They actually got them from somewhere else, either through moving them with the people that had them, like migrants or diaspora, or with teams of people, which happens when FDI comes in and sets up a new factory or R&D facility in a country. And I think I went probably way over my time, so I apologize for that, but I'll leave it at that.